Hi, welcome back to part two with Joe Lavine, award-winning documentary film, TV producer, director, and Joe, part one was fascinating, but part two we're going to explore some other areas. And, again, we talk about how people get into careers, and we talked about how you got into this industry. Are there opportunities for young people today that were similar to what you were offered to you years back?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, I can't speak specifically about when I got in and what's out there today, but I can tell you that with so many different places looking for programming, there are lots of places that young people can look to work. I mean, when I got in, it was, what do we talk about, the 5, 6 television stations was it, and then it became cable, which opened up the playing field, and now you have streaming, which opens it up even more. So there are lots of opportunities. It just takes hard work and stick-to-itness, to get into it. I try to tell all young people when they ask me, what's the best way in, and I know that everyone does this now, so it's not news, but internships are incredibly valuable. When I was at HBO, we would hire interns, because we worked with them for the summer. We knew who they were. They weren't just a name on a piece of paper. So that was always great to meet people through internships. Get in any way you can. My first job, I was a messenger. I drove a car between Newark and Trenton and Stockton for New Jersey Public Television. I was the messenger. I would drive the mail back and forth. But at night, I would go on shoots. I would hang around the edit rooms, and I would just sit and observe, and little by little I would learn things, and a job opened up, and then you just take that to the next step. And you can't be shy. You really can't be shy in this industry.
Rejection will be part of it in the beginning. You're going to get rejected here and there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You're going to get rejected more than people say yes, but all you need is that one yes. And then once you get that opportunity, once the door's open, then it's up to you. Then it's really on you to sell yourself, to work hard, and to perform and to produce.
Well, good advice, Joe. I'll tell you, a former colleague of yours, Jeff Belinfanti, who we interviewed here a couple of years ago, was saying with the advent of the advancements of all this tremendous technology that you can actually start doing things. Everybody can be a producer, a director in their own little realm from home or any other position.
That's a really good point, and I can tell you firsthand that I have gotten on the train or the subway or whatever, and I've seen kids with laptops open and they're editing on the train. And now this is something when I broke in, I mean, you had to be in an editing room. You had to, go to a studio. You had to be somewhere to do it. You couldn't do this mobile. You couldn't take this home with you. But now with the technology, you can do so much. I worked with an editor who also was very good with music. And we would edit during the day, and he would recall, oh, okay, we need something with this mood, with this mood. And here I am thinking he's going to go through a library of prepared music. He would go home on the train, and he would compose something on the train. He'd come in the next morning, and it would be the foundation for what could be our main theme. So it is incredible with the technology today and what you can do.
And the great advancements. Again, in production at your level, Joe, it can be quite expensive. Are there ways that you as a producer, a director, can economically make decisions that would be more feasible with today's advancements, technology advancements, instead of doing everything on a location?
Your budget will dictate, how you go about producing your show, if you're being responsible about it. Your budget's going to tell you, can I fly in the best cameraman to shoot something? Or is your budget going to tell you, I better hire someone that lives right in that town where I just pay him for 4 hours? So that's really what dictates how you go about this, and how big of a production you have. Your budget will tell you how much you can afford your footage, the footage in the show. This show that I just worked on, this Grantland Rice, Grantland Rice covered the 1919 Black Sox World Series. Of course, everyone knows that's when the Black Sox threw the World Series. Well, I had seen a movie that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, 8 Men Out. And I love the movie, and I knew that I wanted to use some scenes from 8 Men Out. So I made sure in doing this show that I could afford that footage. It's very expensive to license feature film footage. So I made sure that I cut corners in other areas, that I would have the money to acquire this footage. And there's 2 clips from the movie in the show.
Well, think about and talk about some of the other areas which material comes from or you get for a documentary. You used a movie, clips from other places,
right.
Newspaper articles, which we talked about in part right. 1. Music. Do you have access to any music, or do you have to have?
Again, your budget will tell you, can I go out and have an orchestra come in and create an entirely new original soundtrack? The way at HBO we did that, we had the budget for that. For other projects, you're probably not going to have that much money to do it. So there are things called a stock library where you can go out and license already, composed music. So you can do that. With this past ESPN project, I'm lucky because ESPN has a library, so we can use their library, and then that doesn't hit your budget. So there's just different ways to, acquire the elements you need to tell your story.
Joe, talk about a team. Obviously, at this point, there are certain people you feel more comfortable with than others that you've worked with. I'll mention one, Wheezy Shapiro, right? So who are the major players on a team that Joe Lavine would put together? What are their roles?
Well, in my world, when I do a show, first and foremost is the editor. I like to know who is going to edit the show. I've worked with several editors over the years who I feel very comfortable with, and they're always my first phone call. As soon as I find out that I'm working on a project and what the project is, I'll call them up. I'll say, okay, so what are you doing 4 months from now? And then 3 to 4 months after, I want to know their schedule, and I want to, lock them in right away. Yeah, the editor to me is the, the single most important person on the show. And then there's, someone who can find footage. That's an art. That's a real, a lot of people don't know where to look for the footage, and to have someone that knows where things are is key. A writer, you talk about Wheezy Shapiro. I've worked with Wheezy since, I'm embarrassed to tell you how many years it's been, but 30 years at least that we've worked together. She becomes like a second brain almost, because we know each other so well, we know how each other works, and I can just throw ideas out at her. If she says to me, okay, so what's this show you're going to work on? I don't have to give her, a 2-page description of everything. I can give her a sentence or 2. And she knows how I work, I know how she works. So, she'll know, okay, he's going to do this, this, and this with it, and then we can do this. So it's just, being familiar, trusting the people you're with, obviously respecting what they do, and then, just giving them some freedom. But really, it's trading the ideas back and forth.
And of course, even with cameramen, they're all independent.
Absolutely.
They're not full-time staff
Absolutely.
people
Yep.
in your situation now
Yep.
that you have your own production company.
Right. So whether you're working here local in the New York area, or you're going somewhere else out of town, you want to believe in the people you're working with. You're trusting them to be a big part of your show. So I will go to places and use people out of town, but I usually try to do it through word of mouth. If I'm going somewhere and I've never worked with anyone in that town, I'll call around to, there's a whole network of people, producers like myself, and I'll call around and say, hey, have you worked with anyone in Nashville? Anyone you can recommend? And eventually you will find somebody that way.
Biographically, again, Joe, you've done so many different types of work and so many different types of sports documentaries, but let's talk about some of the individuals. We did talk about Lombardi, DiMaggio, Namath. Let's stay with them. As you get to know them and you delve into studying these people, are there certain common denominators for successful driven people that you find? Are they all kind of uniquely driven, whether it's by passion, whether it's by insecurity, something else, money?
Well, they're all at the top of their game. They're all very, very, very successful in what they're doing, which is like a lot of other industries, a lot of other, jobs. They're very successful businessmen. There's very successful doctors. I think all these people share something. I mean, we see the athletes because they're in front of us all the time. with the three you mentioned, they were all driven. There's no question about it. They all have maybe had a different way to go about it. They all had a way of maybe motivating themselves, of proving people wrong, or something happened in their childhood. Lombardi, I think he battled what he felt was a real Italian bias. So in his mind, he was going to succeed. Namath was an interesting character. He always seemed so laid back and just such a good time, a fun guy to be with. But there was a very serious side to Joe, and a lot is made of Joe and his nighttime activities. And it was very interesting. And he explains it this way. He goes that the coach, who was Weeb Eubank, practiced the team late in the morning, early afternoons. He wanted their body clock to be used to game time. So he didn't have to be up at 7:30 in the morning. He didn't have to be at a practice at 8 a.m. He had to get up at noon, and he had to be to the Jet practice facility at 1 for practice. So much is made of his nightlife, and he earned some of that. But on the other hand, he was able to sleep in the mornings. So it's what worked for him.
Well, in your story with Joe Namath, what I guess the general public didn't realize, that here's a kid, he was kind of a down-to-earth, very open individual, out of Western Pennsylvania. In fact, I think his best friends were African American at a time when that wasn't really overly accepted in the area. Came from a tough home life, though. Tough situation with Dad.
Yeah, I mean, his parents were divorced. So there was a period of time where Dad moved out and it was just he and his mom. There's no question about that. But he had a big family, and they were all right in the area, and they all, rallied together. And to hear Joe tell it, like his dad was around, it's just that he wasn't living in the house. But what you said about Joe is right. He came from a very mixed community. And Joe's big wake-up call, I think, was when he went to Alabama. Because as you say, he had a very good friend, an African-American friend, was one of his best friends growing up. And there were others in the neighborhood, very mixed, but when he gets to Alabama, it's segregated. So now for the first time, here's this kid from Pennsylvania, and he's mixing with all these, Southerners, most of them all from Alabama. And that was pretty uncomfortable for him in the beginning.
Darrel Hill, University of Maryland, first African-American player to play in the South. You did a story on integration of football. Right. What did you find going through that? What was the most fascinating part of Darrel Hill?
He told one story, and it's not so much an on-the-field story, but I'll never forget him telling me that he remembered, I think he said he remembered seeing the Klan like marching on Pennsylvania Avenue or something like that. And I thought to myself, my God, how would you react to something like that? And then he also then went on to tell the story that he saw Martin Luther King. He was on the Mall the day that Martin Luther King made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And that sort of changed everything in his mind that, hey, you know what? Maybe I am more than just a football player. Maybe there is something I can do. Because I think something had happened where first he went to Navy, and then he transferred to Maryland. And some people approached him at Maryland and said, you should be more active, and speak out about what's going on with the racial situation. And he didn't want. He said, I'm a football player. Leave me alone. I do my talking on the field. But I think it was after he saw, the King's speech that I really, really woke him up. And that was really interesting. That whole show, I really learned a lot about the South and what went on in the whole integration process.
And especially the timeline. And we're talking about the early 60s then, right, Joe.
Right.
Ali Frazier, One Nation Divisible. Tell us about that.
We did a show, this was at HBO, we did it on the first Ali Frazier fight, which I don't know if there's anything that's ever happened before or since that has been as politically driven. I mean, maybe you could say Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, but that was at least the entire United States was for Joe Louis. Ali Frazier was really, it hit in a time period, 1971, where just politics was everywhere, and you were on one side or the other, or you were trying to figure out which side to be on. And Ali represented one side, and Frazier represented the other side, and somehow some of the messages got crossed, and it was a fascinating show to work on, and really get to know. I got to know Joe through that show, because so many shows had been done with Ali where it's Ali, it's Ali, it's Ali. And I mean, honestly, I grew up in the Trenton area. I was a Frazier guy.
Yeah,
I mean, he was from Philly,
yeah.
so I was pulling for Frazier. So I always was a fan of Frazier. So when we decided to do this show, I thought, why don't we tell it through Joe's eyes? I don't know that I've ever really heard Joe's story. And it was fascinating. It was somewhat sad. There was some happy, but I mean, it was something that affected him for the rest of his life.
Which documentary do you feel was the most uplifting documentary that you did, that you walked out inspired?
Well, Dare to Dream was the story of the women's national soccer team. This was the Mia Hamm, Julie Foudy team that captured America, you know, in 1999, I guess it's a long time ago, but that was that championship game. And I'm saying that from a personal standpoint. I have 3 daughters. They all played soccer. So when I worked on that show, they just couldn't get enough of, you know, what was it like to meet him, and can I meet him? And it was the, I say this all the time, but it was the only time they've all come to me and said, Dad, you have a really cool job. You know, because here I was dealing with people, they were playing soccer, you know, and these were women that they respected, and here was a show that we were doing about those women. So that was an
uplifting.
Yeah.
Do you have a couple ideas out there right now that you would like to pursue moving forward over the next couple years? Are there any big projects that you would like to take on?
Well, there's always something next. I don't have anything that I can be specific about. I'm always keeping a list by my desk and starting to look into certain things. Nothing yet with a lot of momentum, but you know, I'm just not sure what that next one could be. At some point, I'd like to do something outside of sports. I'd like to tell some you know, non-sports stories, but it's been great. You know, it's been a great career, that's for sure.
All right, so tell the public, and I know you're way too modest to go here, but let's talk a little bit about it, because it's really best in class, best in the industry, the Peabody Award, the Emmys. Obviously, it's just kind of validates really hard work and good work, and a lot of people are involved with it. I know you'd be the first person to say it, but why don't you explain what a Peabody is? What does it represent?
I guess excellence in the field. Peabodys are given for lots of things, you know,
different categories.
Absolutely. Just trying to think, you know, everything from radio shows to things on, you know, that are being streamed, television shows, news shows. I don't think there's actual parameters for what it is to qualify. So it could be anything, I guess is what I'm trying. It could come from any genre of broadcast entertainment. And it means a lot. Yeah, the Peabody is certainly one of the most well-respected of the awards that you can be given. And what you said, I can't repeat enough, that there's no one show that one person's responsible for. It's always a team of people.
Have you thought about teaching, Joe? Teaching some of this wonderful experience that you have?
I don't, not really.
No.
I never really considered it. I mean, I don't know I don't know. I just know how to do what I do.
Yeah.
I know how to do that. I don't know that I could teach other ways to do what I do.
Well, for full disclosure, we had lunch a little while ago. We had 7 interns upstairs that are with Hometown TV. We had a wonderful seminar that, you know, you were basically the target of the questions and answers, and you did a fabulous job, and they were all very, very excited to have the opportunity to speak to you today. Which question or what questions surprised you up there?
Well, they were all good questions because they were all insightful. You know, they wanted to know about the industry and how you get involved and what's most important to you when you do a show. So I don't know that there was any one question. The one bit of information that I might have failed to say in that meeting that I try to tell people when they ask me about this industry, as far as storytelling is, you got to know how to write. You have to know how to write. I mean, it's kind of a joke that I've had with people that I've worked with, that you only need 3 things to do a good show. You need a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's all you need. It sounds easy, but to find those things isn't always the easiest thing. But I am not a great writer, and it's the one thing I'm very envious of good writers. That if anyone wants to get into this industry from a storytelling standpoint, besides not quitting and having the gumption to just keep at it and not being shy, besides those things, you have to know how to write. Even if you're not handing anything in, write a diary, anything. You just want to perfect how to tell a story. You want to know how to build the story, how to, your peaks and your valleys. These are all very important things that you really only learn through doing it. So that's my one.
Creative mind, ability to communicate that creative mind, either through writing, of course verbal, which is a given. Are you a reader?
Honestly, unfortunately, I'm not, for one reason, because I'm always reading about my next subject. I always say the day I retire, I'm going to go to the library, or I'm going to go to a bookstore, and I'm going to get every book that I've always wanted to read. So yes, I read a lot, but it's always from a research standpoint. I always feel guilty if I'm not reading about my next subject, if I'm just doing like recreational reading. So unfortunately, I don't get to read that many books, but the books I'm reading are, about biographies or about an event that happened in history. So yeah, it's.
Are you a movie watcher?
Yeah, like everyone else.
All right. Now, when you watch a movie, what are you looking at besides the story? Do you ever get into the technical aspects of what's being presented?
Yeah, you can't help it. You can't help sitting there and taking a step back and listening to the music. And is this music working? And, are these actors, are they cast right for this part? Now, I've never done motion pictures, so I'm not an expert on it. I have an opinion just like anyone else would. But I'll look at a movie that way. And yeah.
Do you think the trendsetter for sports documentaries might have started back in the 60s with maybe NFL Films doing those pieces? You mentioned that up at our little seminar upstairs. And if so, kind of expand on what impressed you about that production back then and way before a lot of the quality stuff that we saw 10 years later come out.
Right. Well, there were some people, like I want to be clear that we didn't invent at HBO, we didn't invent sports documentaries. I think we had our role in moving it forward. But yeah, I mean, there were documentaries forever. Before that, like I said, the Olympic films that went way back to the 30s. NFL Films carved out their own special place, and I mean, there's just, in what they do, what they did, and what they're doing today, there's just nobody like them. They figured out that music was so key to what they were doing, and they would bring in this big orchestra, and they have their own people that would come in and compose this music, and then you brought in the John Facenda voice, and then you had these cameramen that were just incredible, who were able to follow a football, and now you're seeing the game. You watch the game on Sunday, but then you watch the NFL Films shows, and it's like, wow, this is a whole different view. They put sound, they mic'd people. We never heard a coach talk before. I mean, this was unbelievable. You got to hear what was going on, on the sidelines. And I've always felt that in any of these shows, access is huge. If you can show somebody something they've never seen before, if they've never heard before, that's a home run.
When you were doing World Series highlights, were you miking people in those days?
Yes. Yeah, we absolutely were, and there's lots of stories of things we were allowed to use and we couldn't use, and things that we were privy to hearing. But yeah, and it just opens up the story, and it tells so much more. I remember the first World Series I think that I produced was the '84 World Series. It was years ago, but it was the Padres were playing the Tigers, and Dick Williams was the manager of the Padres, and he wore a microphone for us. And there was a questionable, Goose Gossage was on the mound, and they wanted him to walk Kirk Gibson. the batter, and he didn't want to walk him. And so you're
Heard the
privy to
exchange.
this conversation where the pitcher is talking the manager out of, no, I'm not going to walk him. I want to pitch to him. And he pitches to him, and it's a home run, and it's just unbelievable because you had Sparky Anderson in one dugout for the Tigers. He's going nuts. You have Dick Williams. So it told the whole story through them being mic'd.
All right, so give me a character. Give me somebody that had personality that surprised you. I know you did some work with Lasorda, I believe, and some of the other people in baseball.
A character, so many people that we've dealt with over the years. I always go back to Namath. He really was one in a million. I grew up in the New York area, so to actually get to meet him, sit with him, and then deal with him for over a year in doing this show, that he was a character. He really was. I don't know. I really have to sit back and think. I don't know, I did a documentary on Jim McKay. Jim McKay was Wide World of Sports. Now, people today have no idea what Wide World of Sports was. But in our day, they were like, the ESPN. They were the first people that would have the World Cup. That would have, a car race that you might see every...
ABC, Wide World of Sports.
Right.
It went together.
So I dealt with Jim and his wife for a good part of a year, and it was just really one of the more rewarding experiences I've ever had. Here I'm sitting with television history, and to hear him tell me stories of what it was like when they would go to these early Olympics, in the 60s, and there was one Olympic that I wanted to look up, the 72 Olympics, and his experience and having to talk about the Munich massacre. If anyone remembers what happened in that Olympics, was unbelievable. And we went back and we wanted to see, how much material really was there for us to work with. And, you see the Olympics today, and it's on hours and hours and hours. They're on for 2 weeks straight. We went back, and in the 60s, the 70s, and even into the early 80s, they were on for the weekend. They might have something, a special. So that just showed how much it had changed. But to deal with Jim McKay was really, really fascinating.
And did you ever think, fast forward, that someday you would be working the Olympics?
Right. Well, I feel that anyone in sports television, that, I don't know, I just think it's one of those things that everyone should do once to get a real feel for what it's like to work on an international event.
Well, Joe Lavine, again, for a young kid out of the Trenton area in New Jersey who really didn't know what they want to do for a living, you certainly have risen to accomplish many, many wonderful things, tell some tremendous stories, highlight some very, very important issues to our society, and I look forward to watching and seeing your future work, which there'll be a lot of moving forward too, and can't thank you enough for joining us at Hometown TV.
Thank you for having me. I
Appreciate it. And thank you for joining this special.